Welcome to the GOTO podcast. Each episode covers the brightest and boldest ideas from the world's leading experts in software development. Tune in for practical lessons, compelling theories, and plenty of inspiration. GOTO gathers the brightest minds in the software community to help developers tackle projects today, plan for tomorrow, and create a better future. Stay up to date with the latest in tech through GOTO's top-rated events held online and in person in cities like Amsterdam, London, Copenhagen, and Chicago, and by subscribing to the GOTO Conference's YouTube channel, where you can find thousands more high-quality dev talks. Learn more at gotopia.tech.
Hello and welcome to this episode of GOTO Unscripted. I'm Charles Humble. I'm a freelance techie editor, author and consultant, and this is part of a series of podcasts that I'm doing for GOTO, talking to software engineering leaders. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Alice Bartlett. She is a tech director at the Financial Times, the world's leading paper on business and economic news, and at the FT, she oversees the team that builds and maintains FT.com and the apps. She's been at the FT for about 10 years, and prior to joining the FT, she was a senior developer for government digital services here in the UK. Alice, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hi, great to be here.
Lovely to have you on. I can't resist asking you about the FT's pink paper, which is kind of the thing that I think, certainly it's the first thing I think of when I think of the FT is the colour. And I was thinking, as I was prepping this morning, because you work on digital products, that colour must be a nightmare because it's terrible for contrast and stuff.
Yeah, it is. And it limits the colours we can use with it. But also that colour, when I'm giving talks, it's something I have to think about a lot because that colour reads when projected as white. So although I want my slide deck to be on brand, I actually have to use an off-brand colour, not the hexadecimal colour we use for the website, for the slides, because otherwise it just looks like I put something on white, and I do want it to seem pink and FT-like.
Where does that colour come from? Where does the pink paper come from originally? What's the story there?
That's undyed. So that pink colour was cheaper 100 years ago when we started printing. It's not cheaper anymore because processes have changed and improved, and so maintaining that pink is actually now more expensive. But it's such a core part of our brands that obviously we just have to pay more.
Yes. Before we get specifically into talking about your role, I'm interested in exploring the FT's sort of editorial team as stakeholders, because with print media traditionally, I think they tended to see the web very much as it's just another place where we put the newspaper, that very kind of legacy way of thinking. But I think the editorial at the FT was maybe a bit more progressive. So how involved are they in thinking about technology and how it might help them to tell the kind of stories they want to tell?
I think we've got the editorial is about 600 people at the FT, and so some of them are more progressive, some of them are less. It's what you'd call a destination employer as well. So the churn at the FT and the average age of a person working in editorial is older, and they've been here longer, and so they tend to hold like a variety of views, but some people really are still thinking very much that print is what they care about the most because they just have worked for the FT for like 30 years and the website is just this tiny thing that's just happened as far as they're concerned. But we have some really great people who've also worked for the FT for a long time now, come to think of it, who really think less about print and digital as like channels, but more like the storytelling capabilities of each medium. And so we do a lot of work with editorial where we are talking to them about how they want to tell a story, and they're really only thinking about the digital aspect of that because the print way of telling a story hasn't changed. So that's what interactive elements can we put in the story, and how can we create these sort of rich and immersive experiences in service of the journalism. So we do have some really progressive people in editorial, certainly, who think about digital more than just where the words go.
Right. And who are your kind of main competitors in terms of both technology and storytelling?
The people that internally we talk about the most are the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Mm-hmm. And then Bloomberg is a competitor in terms of sort of financial news, but they are quite a different proposition in terms of what they're publishing. It's just that our customers are often both Bloomberg customers and FT customers because that's the finance sector.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And you were quite early to put a paywall up and basically shift to being a subscription business first and foremost. So presumably you have, as well as the editorial group, I presume you have like a commercial or a subscription group who are primarily concerned with getting people to subscribe. So what's that intersection like? How do you kind of balance their needs against editorial needs?
It's a challenge, actually, because they are both important stakeholders. And we have different teams whose focus is different stakeholders. So there's the storytelling in my group. I've got about 70 engineers. There are storytelling teams basically that are focused on aspects of the editorial experience. And then we have acquisition teams. We have an ads team, and they're dealing more with the commercial side of the business. It's not that they're completely siloed. Often there's crossover, but generally speaking, the life cycle team, as we call them now, are dealing with retaining customers and acquiring new customers. And they're not thinking about what goes on the article page.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And I'm guessing as well, because you were quite early into the whole internet thing in a lot of ways. I mean, I think you were a relatively early kind of adopter of the internet as a channel. I know you said that you don't really think of it as channels, but you know what I mean. So given that, how much legacy do you have to deal with from a code point of view? Killing old features tends to be quite hard.
Well, I think that within my area, the oldest code base is the app, actually, which is, I want to say 15 years old, which is obviously absolutely ancient, especially for an app. That is ridiculous. And then the website got rebuilt and relaunched in 2016. So there's some 2016 code still knocking around, but it's been we've managed to keep it sort of constantly worked on. So there's not too much. When it was rebuilt, it was written in Node. And microservices, very modern, cutting edge for 2016. And so actually it doesn't really feel very legacy there. There's some much more legacy stuff around the rest of the FT, particularly around our sort of publishing API, like the API layer. But even that is being kind of slowly modernized.
Right. Okay. So with that as background, can you tell me about your role at the FT? Because I said in the intro, you've been there quite a long time, and you started, I think, as a principal engineer, more or less, and then shifted to being a tech director over time. So can you talk about that a bit? What was the role of a principal engineer like at the FT, and how did that transition happen?
Yeah. So I joined here 9.5 years ago in the Origami team, which is the team that creates the component library.
Mm-hmm.
And then I joined the group I'm in now, customer products, and was a principal engineer there, overseeing various teams and leading various bits of work. And then about 2 years ago, I became the tech director. And the principal engineer role here, up until literally January, when we changed it finally, was not a principal engineer like how most companies have that role. It was not an individual contributor role. It was engineering leadership, but you would be doing some managing of managers, some strategy and leadership, kind of technical leadership stuff. And there was much less hands-on stuff than a lot of principal engineer roles elsewhere.
Right. Okay. Alongside that, how's the sort of organization changed then in the time you've been at the FT? Because you said the role has changed, but has the FT itself changed in terms of how it sort of runs the technology organization in the time you've been there?
It has, but not majorly. The technology department hasn't really changed because the code is always sort of roots you in reality. It's very hard to shift people and responsibilities around because there's all this software that has to be maintained and you can't just sort of get rid of it. Whereas if you are in a product management org, it's kind of possible to make much more drastic changes quite easily. So the technology hasn't really changed. We had one major thing a few years ago where we spun up some nearshoring in Sofia. So I've got a load of colleagues in Bulgaria now. And then that coincided with rearranging the sort of technical domains to be around stakeholders. And so we had an internal products team that manage all of the Salesforce stuff. They also build and maintain Spark, which is our CMS. Mm-hmm. And then all of the stuff in customer products is front end, customer facing, and that's where I am. But there's not been major upheaval since I've been here, just I think because it's so hard to make those kind of changes with technology. What has changed, we announced it at the beginning of this year, was the creation of an IC track at the FT. So previously we had individual contributors, but there wasn't in the career progression framework any calling out of that. And so what that kind of meant was that at the senior 2 level for engineers, for example, some people would be able to evidence that they were managing people and doing leadership through management. And some people who didn't want to manage weren't able to, and they would have to find other ways to do that, which is possible. But it also meant that you could kind of sit in the middle, not being a very strong technical contributor or a very strong people manager, because at no point was it defined narrowly enough that you knew that you had to be good at or great at all of these things. So we split those 2 roles out to give people more clarity on what their jobs are. And yeah, that's the change we made at the beginning of this year.
Right, that's fascinating, actually. So can you tell me about your current team? What are you responsible for at the FT?
So ft.com, mm-hmm. Not all of it, but the majority of it, most of the customer experiences that happen on that, and then the app and the edit, which is a 8 stories a day sort of micro subscription.
So is that like a lower price point subscription alternative? Right. Okay. Yeah. Yep. And can you describe the structure? So how are the various engineers divided into different teams, and what does it kind of look like?
So there are 10 teams, which are split into 4 groups. Lifecycle, which is about acquiring and retaining customers. The apps, the edit and the main app. And the experience team, which is looking at like the homepage, the article page, search, all of the things that people come to the site to do. Mm-hmm. And then we have the reliability and platforms and ads teams who are basically working on ft.com, the platform. And it's all of the front end bits. So we back onto a load of APIs from another team in Sophia, but all of the content sort of ends. It's where all the content ends is what is in my group.
Right. Got you. Okay. And then, so as I understand it, your principal engineers also do management or some management. Is that right?
Yeah. So we've just changed that. So I now have one principal engineer who is an individual contributor, and I've got 4 others who do management, help with delivery, like team health, help with sort of direct technical stuff too. They're all very technical managers, but the IC one doesn't and won't have any managerial responsibility. He is a leader in other respects, but not through managing managers.
Right, got you. And how many tech directors are there overall?
There are 6.
Right, okay.
There are 6.
And you all report into a CTO, or?
Yes, we all report into Rebecca Salisbury, who is the CTO.
Right, got you. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I think we sort of see what the structure looks like. People have quite naive ideas on the whole about what a tech director actually does. So can you maybe describe the role a bit for us? What's actually involved?
Firstly, all of the hardest problems within the sort of 70 people that work in customer products end up with me. You never get the easy problems because the easy problems are solved already. So you might get an FYI about, we solved this easy problem, but you never actually, it's never worth your time to really hear about it.
Yeah.
So all of the hardest problems, and you can imagine with that many people, there's a lot of there's a lot of just life happening that often requires kind of, I either need to know just because that's the responsible thing to happen is me to know things, or I need to give advice to my managers about how to have difficult conversations, what the outcome is. I need to make sure that they're following the sort of HR practices we have, but also interpreting the HR guidance correctly. And there's often, in those respects, I'm always trying to coach the people who report into me in those conversations rather than have them myself, but sometimes when it's a particularly difficult situation, then I will be involved. So those things happen. That's just the scale. The number of people you have, the more people you oversee, the more you have to spend some time on those kind of problems. Then there's sort of thinking a couple of years out about where we're trying to take, like the problems we're looking at today, problems that are going to happen, we think, in the future, and making sure that someone is looking at where customer products, but also the FT as a whole, is going to go in the next 2 to 3 years. And there's some stuff that's very speculative about that. And then there's some stuff that I'm like, well, there are some aspects of the work that I can see where we're trying to get to, but also like what the current next step is. And then you're kind of always adjusting and helping people to adjust their work and their processes to get to some vision. So that's another big bit of the work. And then the third thing is, it's not so much dealing with problems of staff, but it's problems of just the work. There's often some things gone slightly wrong. Mm-hmm. So I spend a lot of time kind of listening and thinking and maybe doing some stakeholder management and maybe communicating upwards to our CTO so that she never wants to be surprised. And so making sure that the right information is in the right places and that my peers, the tech directors, either side of me, they have the right information as well. So that if we're all trying to manage either a technical incident or a stakeholder relationship that's gone a bit funky, we all have the same information and we all understand kind of what we want to get out of it. And we're able to kind of manage a situation so that the people who are doing the work can just get on with it without being sort of pushed around by the winds within the organization.
Right. Yes. There's quite a lot to unpack there, actually. I'm curious about, so if you're being brought into one of those sort of difficult problems and maybe you have to intervene at some level, how do you go about building out enough context to intervene in an appropriate way?
I rely on my principal engineers.
Mm-hmm.
My boss doesn't like being surprised. Neither do I. So I'll often expect them to have a good briefing for me. And if they don't, then we'll explore it together. And they will often go away with some things to find out. That first thing is essential. I need to know what is happening from the principal engineer who's sort of closer to the thing. Mm-hmm. And then I can go into a meeting with a stakeholder and get their perspective, or I can go into a meeting with my product director counterpart or whoever and have a conversation about what's happening there. And that involves being very curious and non-judgmental, because particularly for me, I have a real bias for action, which sometimes does get me into trouble. And so I'm always trying to not say the first thing, but listen to what's going on around and what people are telling me. And so then generally the way for me to not act is to keep asking more questions. That's how I get all the context. And then I have to go away and think about it, because I'll usually have to, if it's really messy, I'll have to turn over the information I have outside of work time in my head to kind of pick the next action that, again, isn't about me jumping into something.
Right.
Provided the situation allows that time for reflection. Sometimes they don't.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. How do you balance, this is something that I've personally struggled with, so this is a bit of a selfish question that I'm thinking about it, but how do you balance your timetable time, so the time you've got in meetings or whatever, with the ad hoc things that come in that are, I imagine, quite a large part of your daily work, but you can't really plan for them by their nature. So how do you balance those?
It is really hard. Actually, what's hard is that I'm usually so busy that when I have a gap, I'm like, oh my God, what do I do now? Oh, I've got this hour. I mustn't waste it. Oh my God, I'm so busy. Oh, and then I end up not doing anything. And it's just, I'm just there going, that feels worse than being really busy.
Mm-hmm.
My team are just really great. I have these 5 principal engineers. They each know what they're doing. Every week I have an hour with each of them, and I have an hour with all of them at the same time. And so a lot of these live things that are happening, one of them will be my sort of point person on that. And so part of the balancing my time is knowing, well, do I need to have a conversation about this right now? Or can it actually wait till I have a one-to-one with Tatiana tomorrow and we can talk about it then? And also, all of them know enough that, like, if I spend the next 6 months having one-to-ones with them about just work, and they will be able to interject and be like, could we talk about me for a sec? And that is like an acceptable and important thing for them to say. So, like, just having a really strong team of people who I've worked with for a long time, who I know really well. We were peers, and then I became the tech director. There's just a lot of like respect there, but also they are really on it for their own domains. They know what they need to be doing, which means that I can leave things that are on fire enough that they can be left to a couple of days when I have a one-to-one, instead of spending all my time trying to get up to speed on something that I sort of know is being handled by a principal engineer. And I need to trust that if I really need to be brought into something right now, then they will. But otherwise, they will tell me, they will give me an update in our one-to-one, and that will actually be fine.
I think that's such a great insight, actually. I think that thing of trusting the people around you to bubble up when things are really important and let you crack on when they're not I think is a really key part of it, actually. I have a sort of vaguely related question, which is, do you have any advice for when you yourself are not at your best? So certainly for me, sometimes that might be like outside stuff, like things that are going on with my children or something like that, which is making it difficult to maybe be as focused as I would like at work, or maybe I'm a bit stressed and I can be a bit less empathetic or a bit more flippant when I'm under stress. I'm just curious if you have any advice on that, if that's something that you experience, and if you have any thoughts on it.
Yes. I tell you what I do when I'm stressed. I am bad at keeping secrets. And we all have these things that we do that, like, are natural impulses that feel just like who we are, that when we're in a professional context, we can keep on top of, provided we're not tired, we're not overwhelmed by something else. And then when you know you've got like way less to keep on top of, like to remain professional and to remain sort of present and keep on top of these bad habits or like bad impulses, they come out. And so the first thing is know what your bad impulses are. Me, I know it's gossiping and telling people things, like thinking out loud too much, saying too much stuff, all of that. So know what your bad habits are. And then when you can feel the bad habits coming, just for me, it's like, make yourself unavailable. Talk to only the people you need to talk to. And especially if you've got people that you know are going to bring out these bad habits more, like just find ways to limit the interactions to what is essential while you get back on top of whatever it is that's creating this kind of hole in your reserves.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice. I just thought of an article that I edited actually years ago for somebody called Helen Bassmate, which is about sort of dark impulses that come out when we're under stress. So I will get that linked to in the show notes as well, because it's kind of overlap and it's kind of interesting. Do you have any advice on where you've got to give difficult feedback? So how you approach, I don't know, telling someone they're maybe underperforming or something like that? So
the first thing is to prepare for the conversation. Don't just wing it. And that's advice for me, because I'm a real winger of things. But it's not appropriate to wing those. The next thing is to just remain curious about why. Like, you're not telling someone they're underperforming. Ideally, they shouldn't be hearing. That shouldn't be what they kind of need to know that. But also, it's not a conversation in which you go in and say, you're underperforming, there is the information. Why are they underperforming? What have I observed? What have they observed? It should be an agreement between me and the person that they are not meeting the current expectations. But there should also be some curiosity as to why that might be. Not so that they can make excuses, but because people don't just sort of underperform. They don't understand what's expected of them. Maybe something's going on that means that their performance has changed. What is that? Why? Can we support in that? Do they need something that Do they have an unmet need that we can help with? It's basically, I think that's the most important thing, is just be really curious. And the second most important thing is understand what the difference between nice and kind is, because nice says, no, you're not underperforming. Don't worry. It's nothing. Whereas kind is telling someone that they're underperforming, making sure that they know, even though that makes you feel bad, even though you don't enjoy doing that and you feel like a bad person, because to let someone underperform and not realize it is going to be worse for that person in the long run, because they will eventually be moved along. And I think what I see in a lot of quite junior managers is just one of two things. Either you over-index, you're underperforming, I'm a good manager, I have to tell you, blah, or too nice, but not kind.
Right.
I don't want to upset this person. You get to the point where you have to say, and your performance is not meeting our expectations, but you can't, because it doesn't feel kind, doesn't feel nice. So you sort of like sidestep the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. You gave a very interesting talk at Staff Plus a couple of years ago, 2023, called The Journey of a Byline. And we'll link to it in the show notes, because I'd really encourage people to go and watch it. It's a great talk. There's no point in trying to rehash the talk, because people can go and watch the video. So if I try and boil it down, it was basically you had a situation where you had a fairly, I'm going to say, spaghetti-ish system that was a result of lots of building and maintaining a system over a long period of time. And you had a rendering bug, in this case, in the mobile app. And it was really hard to tell where it came from, because you had basically content transformation happening in lots of different places and a certain amount of duplication and so on. Is that a sort of fair high-level summary?
Yes.
Excellent. Yep. Okay. It sounds like one of those projects that I personally would have run a mile on to avoid. It just sounds like, oh God, no. Why did you end up working on it? What was it that drew you to it, if drew you to it was the right thing?
Well, I was actually told to work on it by my then boss, who was the tech director. And she said, and I was really surprised, because this is not really, like, technically not really my bag. Like, these kind of architectural challenges among my peers, the other principal engineers, I just felt there were some other principal engineers who are much more in tune with how our content rendering stack worked than me. I'd never actually overseen any of the editorial team's work. So the team that work on the article page, none of that. So I really didn't know a lot. And I said, like, well, why do you want me to work on it? And she said, because it's really important. We've got loads of stakeholder buy-in, and you're the best at communicating things. And I need someone who is going to not go away and do all the work, but it's going to just look like a bunch of engineers have just run off over here, but someone that is going to keep the work in the light. People are going to be able to understand it, see where the value is, and not feel like it's just happening and nobody's allowed to talk about it because it's too complicated and too technical. And I was like, well, I agree. I am the best communicator, so fine. So we did that, and it was amazing. Like, one of the things I did was make sure that all of my, I don't want to call them weaknesses exactly, but unstrengths were kind of counterbalanced by the team. Again, I got to pick the team, and it wasn't like I forced anyone to do it, but when I was putting the team together, I could see really clearly who was really interested in solving this problem. And so I was able to go and like ask them, hey, do you want to come and be the tech lead of this team? And it was great, because there was a bunch of engineers who have just been like cross with how spaghetti rendering code was, who were like excellent engineers and exactly who you want to be solving that problem, because they really care about it. And so I was able to pull together this team of like highly motivated, very smart people, and we had a great time.
It's interesting that you got the role because of your communication skills. Is that something you sort of have actively worked on, or is that something you're just naturally good at, do you think?
No, it's a natural strength. I mean, that's not a very humble thing to say, but yes, it's important that people know that, because people come and ask me like, how did you get so good at either. The one I get is either being like assertive and saying what I think, or being a good communicator. And I'm like, these things just like, I didn't have to work out that. It's hard for me to give advice on how other people can be good at these things, because
Well, fair enough. But maybe another way to think about it then was were there particular sort of additional outcomes or other positive outcomes that came about as a result of you being, as you put it, good at kind of keeping the work in the light and communicating with stakeholders and doing that sort of thing? Did you find sort of other things that came out of the work as a result of that?
Yeah, I think it went further actually than it might have done, because the team were already quite, I didn't have to do a lot of work with them to get them to proactively communicate about what they were doing. They were really keen to do that and keen to share it. I just sort of gave them some pointers and shaped the output a bit. But it meant that other engineers in the business were interested, and it meant that like one of our initial goal was just to deal with the rendering in customer products, my team. But then one of the team that manages the CMS was like, oh, we render all of the content in our article preview in an entirely different code base. Like we have just duplicated the code for article rendering on the site. And so every time we release a new article feature, we have to build it twice. Could we maybe use this rendering pipeline here too? And I think if we hadn't been communicating so actively, it wouldn't have been as easy to do that.
Having worked on a lot of CMSs as well, that sort of thing is gold, because it's like, it doesn't look like that. I can't fix this problem because it doesn't look like that in the damn CMS. It looks wrong, absolutely.
Yeah. And like that accuracy is really important for our editorial colleagues. So then they were suddenly like, oh, you're able to explain to them what the benefit of this piece of work was, because we couldn't have done this with the previous pipeline. But now, because we have this single thing where all the transforms happen in one place and we've like systematized how an article can be, we can put that in different places and it's easy. So that was really cool.
That is really cool. So was it like a fairly complete rewrite in the end? It wasn't just like changing a bit of rendering code somewhere. It sounds like you were basically rewriting the whole rendering system in the end.
Yeah, it was pretty big, but we broke it down into like smaller pieces. It's finished now, but the initial pitch was 6 months of work, which we did. And then we got to the end of the 6 months and we're like, well, here's some more stuff we definitely need to do. And we kind of kept it going like that. And I don't think if I'd said, can you fund 2.5 years of work, please? Anyone would have been like, sure, absolutely, sounds great. So you kind of need to, comes up with getting stakeholder buy-in, but basically if you're asking for more than 6 months of anybody's time at the FT, it's going to be a no, unless it's like a really big, obvious commercial upswing, which it never is with an engineering tech debt problem like that. It's really hard to evidence that, especially as you don't, not only do you have to evidence it, you have to make it more convincing than all of the other stuff.
Yes. Yeah, because at the end of the day, your business stakeholders are basically trying to assess that priority against a whole bunch of other things. And,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we do get some leeway. People understand that software needs to be maintained. We don't have to convince anyone of that. But yeah, you kind of it can be hard to convince people of sometimes the extent to which it needs to be maintained.
Actually, that's an interesting point there, though, because if you're doing what effectively ends up being quite a major re-implementation, and you've brought engineers in and put a team together to do that, and then presumably at some point that project is done and the engineers go off to do other things, and then you've got basically another system which is now needs maintaining. So who does that transition to? Who maintains it afterwards?
So that's the platforms team in customer products who are maintaining all of the like shared code, basically.
Right.
The article, the storytelling team, I think, also have a bit of this pipeline as well. But that does already exist. There's a reliability team and a platforms team that are both their stakeholders are other engineers in the FT rather than people in editorial.
Right. So is there a process to sort of hand over from development to platform, or what does that kind of handoff look like?
Well, I took some of the people who, this was deliberate, but some of the people who worked on the rebuild were from the platforms team, meaning, that is a way of shortcutting the not invented here, why do you get to do all the fun work and then you hand it over us to maintain it forever? That kind of attitude, which I hate it when people try and get some funding for a fun piece of work and then go, oh, we've done this now and you have to maintain this thing forever.
Yes.
It's always a downer.
Yeah, no fun for anyone, really, is it? Excellent. You said again in your tech director job that one of the bits of that role is kind of thinking about 2 or 3 years ahead. So talk to me a bit about that. How do you do that? What are you doing? How do you keep up to date? What's the process for sort of thinking ahead, as it were, for you?
It's fairly unstructured.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for the FT, I don't think it's giving any confident, commercially sensitive information away to say that we're looking at we've got quite a wide product base. There's the Financial Times, but then we have 15 publications, trade-specific publications like The Banker, The Investors Chronicle. We also have an events business, and is that maybe everything? Yeah. So, but there's lots of stuff we can sell. But at the moment, we don't have a single customer view or the ability to cross-sell or the possibility of asking anything of our events people data, like who went to an event? Do they also have an FT sub? Should we be trying to? You could do much more smart things if you joined up all this customer view together. But technical architecture currently in no way supports that. It's really complicated. And so thinking about that problem and how that is what we should be doing. That's not my job because that's a real sort of commercial strategy, but I know that that's the commercial view. So I'm thinking about the engineering effort, what are the technical limitations to us being able to fulfill those things? And how can I prioritize those now? Because when people start asking for this, I won't be able to say, well, we are in no position to fulfill any of the things you just asked for, but I'll start working on that. And in 2 years' time, maybe. So there's that, and that extends to the whole of technology. I can't really do much about the single customer view because customer data is not in my area, but we all need to be thinking about that kind of problem.
Right. So finally, it feels like a really interesting time in technology at the moment, both the job market, but also what's happening kind of more broadly with AI. And, obviously there are differences of opinion about how much impact that's having on or will have on programming, but it's there and it's a topic of conversation. So I think there are sort of, as I say, 2 separate things there that are maybe interesting. I was just curious to get your perspective on, one, the other, or both of those, really.
Yeah. I mean, I think the main thing that I worry about with AI, when you're in a transitionary phase like this, I've got a load of senior engineers who were trained the old-fashioned way without a lot of sort of AI co-pilot type things and are really able to see what is good about the sort of AI created code that they're looking at and what isn't. And they're able to really be very good judges of that. And then I'm also seeing people in more junior people who are less able to distinguish between good code and bad code. And I think this is the same in any job, anybody whose profession involves some aspect of creating text. Writers can see what good GPT output and what bad GPT output is. So what currently I'm worried about is the more senior people's job becomes, because the volume of code you can write with GPT or Copilot or whatever is so much higher, mm-hmm. Your senior engineer's job becomes a lot more about reviewing these large volumes of not necessarily great code, especially as your more junior people aren't really able to see what's good and what isn't. But that's a sort of temporary phase because eventually your more senior people, they will sort of age out and you'll just end up with a different way of writing code. And I kind of can't really tell whether that different way is better or not. If the code sort of basically works and you never really have to reason about what it's doing and no one cares about the code being not very elegant, for example, then which is elegance is important when a human has to read it and debug it. But if no human ever has to go near it because it's all AIs around everything, then maybe that doesn't matter. But I sort of don't know what the actual outcome of that would be in terms of software quality. It seems bad, but also that's because maybe I'm old-fashioned.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think we've always, I've been in IT for 30 years at this point. And over that time, there have been these sort of moments where we've moved up a level of abstraction, essentially. And
yeah,
like, I don't know, moving from most code being written in a relatively low level language like C or C++ to something like Java or maybe C#. And as you go up that, you lose more of an understanding of what the machine is doing. And most of the time that's okay. And sometimes it's not. Like if you're working on very high performing code, maybe then that abstraction can be a problem. But for most systems, it doesn't really matter. But I can remember old sort of C++ greybeards getting very annoyed about the fact that, nobody knew what was going on under the bonnet anymore. And I wonder if it's a bit the same thing, but I also worry because I'm also a writer and I've seen a lot of very, very bad written stuff that's been sent to me that's very obviously been written by an AI and editing it is joyless.
Totally.
And I worry about what that does to a field and whether you lose expertise along the way. So you lose the ability, as you were saying, you lose the ability to appreciate, is code good or is it not good? And as you say, when that matters and that feeling through it maybe gets eroded.
Yeah. And I think there's some more like acceptable applications of it. I'd be less worried about like generating test data, either creating tests for software you've already written or from some tests. If you're doing test-driven development, then generating the code. And as long as the code always passes the tests and your tests that you wrote fully meet the acceptance criteria, then that could be fine. But it's like a really different way of working. And your expectations on your peers for peer review have to be quite different. Because you would say, don't read any of this AI-generated code. It's just a waste of your time. Spend all your time on the tests. And look, this code passes those tests. We all agree. It doesn't matter what the code is doing.
Right,
or like
yes.
how it's written. But that's like so different to how certainly the teams at the FT are writing software currently. Like I find it hard to imagine that's where we'll get to without sort of deliberate decision to do that instead of write a load of code in GPT or Copilot, write a load of tests in Copilot. Everything is just AI.
Yeah, and there are all sorts of challenges that come up with that as well. Because if you have a hybrid situation, AI will tend to lag behind what is currently idiomatic in a given language, for example, because it's trained on what's effectively legacy code. So if a new version of a framework or a language comes out, the code it's writing is going to be behind the curve. And if you're not reading that code, it doesn't really matter. But if you are, that starts to be quite difficult. You end up with this sort of mismatch of code within a code base, which is not great, possibly.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm trying not to be too much of a doomer about AI because I think like you can just regard it as a tool and it's how skilled the hands that wield it are. But also I am nervous.
Yeah, me too. Alice, thank you very much indeed. It was really great to chat to you. I really appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. It was lovely.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the GOTO podcast. Head over to gotopia.tech to discover lots more content from the brightest minds in software development.